Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes the political exploitation of immigration data. New York files $708 million lawsuit over migrants bust from Texas. A Chinese EV company has taken Tesla's crown. U.S. lawmakers ask Biden administration to bar investments in China's Quectel. Abbott claims feds violated court order by snipping razor wire at Texas border. Is it true? The political exploitation of immigration data. Washington Post. House Speaker Mike Johnson led a delegation of Republicans to the southern border to highlight the number of immigrants seeking to enter the U.S. and the perceived failure of the Biden administration to address the issue. During an interview with CNN, Johnson claimed that over 300 known terrorists had been apprehended at the border, potentially setting up terrorist cells. However, CNN host Jake Tapper clarified that these individuals had been flagged on a certain database, but had not necessarily been proven to be terrorists. The distinction between border stops and new arrivals to the country is important when considering arguments against immigration. New York files $708 million lawsuit over migrants bust from Texas. Financial Times. New York City is suing 17 bus companies for bringing migrants from the Mexican border to the city, at the request of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. The city is seeking $708 million in compensation, which it claims reflects the cost of accommodating the 33,600 asylum seekers bused to New York over the past 20 months. The lawsuit alleges that the bus companies violated a New York law by charging Texas $1,650 per person for their services, far more than the regular bus fare to New York City. New York City has spent $3.5 billion on providing shelter and services for over 164,500 arrivals. A Chinese EV company has taken Tesla's crown. Foreign policy. Chinese electric vehicle, EV, manufacturer BYD has outsold Tesla for the first time ever, selling 526,000 fully electric vehicles, EVs, in the last 3 months of 2023 compared to Tesla's 484,000, according to figures released by both companies. BYD's rapid ascent is a result of China's push to build up its automotive manufacturing base and stake out a position in the global car market. China surpassed Japan last year as the world's largest automobile exporter. The Chinese government has invested billions of dollars into EV manufacturing and has provided subsidies to both manufacturers and buyers, as well as working to build charging infrastructure. BYD's success has raised concerns in Washington and Brussels, with fears that Chinese-made vehicles could dominate their domestic markets. Both the US and the EU are considering imposing higher tariffs on Chinese EVs. China has two key advantages in the global EV race: the size of its own automotive market and its grip on global battery supply chains. BYD has leveraged these dynamics to gain an edge in the global EV market. U.S. lawmakers ask Biden administration to bar investments in China's Quectel. South China Morning Post. The U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party has called on the Biden administration to designate Chinese tech giant Quectel as a military entity, effectively barring U.S. investments in the company. The committee claims there is significant evidence that Quectel may contribute to the Chinese defense industrial base. Quectel describes itself as a global IoT solutions provider, but the committee argues that the company's technology is being used by the Chinese military, citing its supply to Beidou, a navigation satellite system deemed critical to China's military operations. Abbott claims feds violated court order by snipping razor wire at Texas border. Is it true? Yahoo! Texas Governor Greg Abbott has claimed that President Joe Biden's administration violated a court order by cutting razor wire installed by the state to discourage unlawful immigration. Abbott's assertion was based on a video posted on social media by Florida Representative Matt Gaetz. The footage, which was viewed over 1 million times, showed Border Patrol agents cutting concertina wire along the Rio Grande River. However, the video was actually several months old and had been posted by Abbott himself in September. The video was used to support Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's suit to prevent the federal government from removing the razor wire. The Department of Homeland Security had argued that the wire posed a risk to migrants. Since the video was posted, the case has seen several reversals of position and counter-rulings. On December 19, 2023, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals prohibited the cutting of border wire. The Justice Department has since appealed the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Donald Trump received millions from China and other foreign governments while president, report finds. ABC. Donald Trump received at least $7.8 million in foreign payments from 20 countries during his presidency, according to a report by Democratic congressional investigators. The report, released by the U.S. House of Representatives Oversight Committee Democrats, stated that the payments were made to businesses connected to Trump and his family. However, the report only discussed for properties representing less than 1% of the 558 corporate entities Trump owned as president. The report accused Trump of personally profiting from foreign governments while making foreign policy decisions that had far-reaching ramifications for the U.S. NATO scrambles to reload Ukraine's air defense. Foreign policy. NATO has said its procurement branch will help a consortium of European countries buy up to 1,000 Patriot interceptor missiles, worth around $5.5 billion, to aid Ukraine. The move comes as Russia launches its largest missile attack on Ukraine since the 2014 invasion. The alliance is also pushing for its members to ramp up production of 155mm artillery shells. Ukraine has fired so many of these shells that in many cases they have warped the barrels of their weapons. The European Union had only shipped 300,000 artillery shells to Ukraine by November 2023, far short of its goal of sending 1 million by March 2024. Pakistan has announced it will acquire Chinese fifth-generation fighter jets for its air force. China has been pushing its military systems as a competitor to Western arms sales abroad for its own geopolitical influence. The U.S. is heavily courting Pakistan's neighbor and archrival, India, in its competition with China. Education Department official resigns over Biden's policies on Israel and Gaza. New York Times. Tariq Habash, a top advisor at the U.S. Education Department, has resigned in protest over President Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Habash, who is the department's only Palestinian-American political appointee, stated that he could no longer serve an administration that had put millions of innocent lives in danger. He criticized the lack of empathy and recognition of his own humanity by the president and said that he cannot represent an administration that does not value all human life equally. Habash is the second official to publicly resign over the administration's policies on the war. There's new evidence of foreign money going to a president, Trump. Washington Post. Members of the House Oversight Committee have presented evidence that former President Donald Trump benefited from nearly $7.9 million in foreign payments to his properties while he was in office. The majority of the funds, more than $5.5 million, came from Chinese interests, including rent paid by the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China at Trump Tower in Manhattan. The committee has not shown how much of the money went directly to Trump or his family members. In contrast, allegations that President Joe Biden benefited from foreign payments via his son, Hunter Biden, have not produced any concrete evidence. Massachusetts switches on its first large offshore wind farm. New York Times. The Vineyard Wind Project, the first large offshore wind farm in New England, has begun generating electricity. The project, located off the coast of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, is currently able to send 5 megawatts of power to the grid from a single wind turbine. However, the developers plan to install a total of 62 turbines with 800 megawatts of capacity by the end of the year. The project is a significant milestone for the offshore wind industry in the U.S., which has faced challenges including rising costs, supply chain delays, and local opposition. How Trump and his lawyers keep the election fraud mirage alive. Washington Post. Former President Donald Trump continues to claim that the 2020 presidential election was rigged in favor of Joe Biden. Trump's allegations are largely unsupported by evidence and have been widely debunked, but they continue to resonate with his base of supporters. This is due, in part, to the fact that many of his supporters already mistrust official sources and the media. Trump has also been effective in conveying a sense of wrongdoing by throwing out various pieces of purported evidence, however tenuous, to give his supporters something to point to. An example of this can be seen in a recent court filing by Trump's legal team, which included numerous bullet points meant to suggest that the 2020 election outcome in Michigan was illegitimate. However, an objective assessment of these claims shows that they fail to provide any evidence of illegal votes or wrongdoing. Despite the lack of evidence, Trump's base of supporters continues to believe that the election was stolen from him. A recent poll found that nearly half of Republicans think that the results of the 2024 presidential election won't be accurately counted. Joe Biden approaches January 6 with a warning while Trump embraces rioters. The Independent. 3 years after the Capitol attack, the Republican presidential frontrunner continues to threaten American democracy, with President Joe Biden warning that the stakes of the 2024 election could not be greater. Mr. Trump has pledged to pardon those charged in connection with the attack, calling them hostages and patriots, and has financially supported and celebrated these offenders. Recent polling found that Republican voters are more likely to support January 6 defendants and less likely to blame Mr. Trump than they were 2 years ago, while conspiracy theories and misinformation continue to shape public opinion. U.S. sees COVID resurgence as JN.1 variant becomes dominant. Yahoo! The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has said that the wastewater viral activity level for COVID-19 is the highest it's been since the Omicron surge in 2022. The CDC reported 29,000 hospitalizations in the week before Christmas compared with 39,000 in 2022. Trump's shadow already looms over California climate rules. Yahoo! California is waiting on the Biden administration to grant it several high-priority climate and air pollution waivers. The state needs waivers to set more stringent emissions standards than national requirements. The Trump administration had previously withdrawn a waiver granted by the Obama administration that allowed California to enforce auto emissions standards. Consequently, the state is keen to obtain the waivers quickly as the Trump administration could easily prevent California from implementing its rules. The state's new rule requiring trucking companies to purchase increasing numbers of zero-emission vehicles was scheduled to take effect on December 6, 2021. However, the rule has been postponed until the federal government grants California permission to enforce it. A former U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, scientist from the Trump era said that if the waivers have not been provided before a change of administration, a second Trump administration would immediately change direction on those waivers and use any non-legal, non-scientific method to deny them, as they did in the previous administration. Fat Leonard seeks new attorneys ahead of sentencing in Navy bribery case, causing another delay. Associated Press. Defense contractor Fat Leonard Francis, who fled to South America weeks before he was scheduled to be sentenced in one of the biggest bribery schemes in U.S. military history, said Thursday that he wants new attorneys now that he is back in U.S. custody after a Venezuelan prisoner swap. Proud Boys member who went on the run after conviction in the January 6 riot gets 10 years in prison. Associated Press. Christopher Worrell, a member of the Proud Boys extremist group, has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role in the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Worrell had gone on the run after his conviction, but was found 6 weeks later after allegedly faking a drug overdose. Prosecutors argued for a longer sentence, highlighting the cost of the search for him, and the fact that he faked the overdose. Worrell has a rare form of lymphoma, and had claimed he did not want to go to prison because his cancer treatment would be interrupted and could be fatal. There's a glimmer of hope for broader health coverage in Georgia, but also a good chance of a fizzle. Associated Press. Georgia House Speaker John Burns says he wants lawmakers to consider more health coverage in Georgia, as their session begins Monday. But he's careful not to label it Medicaid expansion, and certainly not Obamacare. After North Carolina began offering Medicaid to uninsured adults on December 1, there are 10 remaining states that don't cover people with incomes up to 138% of the federal poverty line. That's what was envisioned in President Barack Obama's 2010 health care overhaul. The Ukraine war may be decided at the ballot box. Foreign policy. The outlook for the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2024 will depend on 3 primary factors: security, politics, and economics. In terms of security, major territorial gains are unlikely due to the hardened front lines and Russian fortifications. However, any major Russian offensive would likely galvanize greater Western military support for Ukraine. In terms of politics, upcoming presidential elections in Russia and Ukraine will have an impact. While the victory of incumbent Putin in Russia is likely, both leaders will face domestic political pressures. The United States will also have its own presidential polls, and U.S. support for Ukraine will have to compete with other issues on the agenda. The evolution of the war in Ukraine will be important for Biden's foreign policy. In terms of economics, financial assistance from the U.S. and EU will be critical for Ukraine's war effort. Economic pressure on Russia, such as seizing Russian central bank assets, could be used to fund Ukraine's war effort. Russia has been able to maintain economic resilience by increasing ties with countries in the global south, but Ukraine remains highly dependent on the West for economic and military support. Economic statecraft and associated diplomacy will play a crucial role in shaping the conflict in 2024. The advantage will go to the side that is more adept at economic and diplomatic maneuvering. Apparent U.S. strike in Baghdad raises specter of wider regional war. Washington Post. An apparent U.S. airstrike in Baghdad on May 20 killed an Iran-linked militia commander, risking regional fallout from Washington's support for Israel's military operation in Gaza. Explosions occurred in the central part of the city, prompting Iraqi authorities to close off streets nearby. The Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba group falls under the command of the Iraqi army, which also claimed the United States was responsible for the strike. China spent millions at Trump properties while he was president. Financial Times. According to a report released by congressional Democrats, Saudi Arabia and China were among 20 foreign governments that spent at least $7.8 million in total at properties owned by Donald Trump while he was president. The findings are the culmination of a years-long probe by House Democrats into whether Trump personally profited from his time in public office. The 156-page report found that state-linked entities from Congo, Malaysia, Albania, and Kosovo also spent money at Trump hotels and apartments. That's all for today's news. We covered a range of topics, from the political exploitation of immigration data to China's rise in the electric vehicle market, as well as calls to bar investments in Chinese tech giant Quectel, and the ongoing controversy surrounding former President Donald Trump's foreign payments. We also discussed the situation in Ukraine, and the potential for a wider regional conflict, as well as the recent U.S. airstrike in Baghdad. Lastly, we touched on the importance of economic and diplomatic maneuvering in shaping the conflict, and the report on foreign governments spending at Trump properties. Remember, these stories are just a snapshot of what's happening in the world today, and there is always more to learn and discuss. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics. What are your ideas and opinions? Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.